Good morning. Welcome to the September 5th service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Brunswick, Maine. My name is David Kew, and I am the chair of our Board of Trustees. This morning's service includes guest worship leader Cynthia Phinney, who is president of the Maine chapter of the AFL-CIO. The title of this service is Essential Workers, Essential Questions, Labor, Solidarity, and Faith. Cynthia will be joined by our own Reverend Justine Sullivan, our interim minister at UUCB. The Charity for Soul in September is Maine Wabanaki Reach. Wabanaki Reach supports the self-determination of Wabanaki people through education, truth-telling, restorative justice, and restorative practices in Wabanaki and Maine communities. As of now, which is September 1st when I'm recording this, we are still leaning toward offering in-person worship on September 12th. The service will also be live streamed from the sanctuary. But please keep an eye on your email and the website in case our plans for this service need to change due to the evolving science of the pandemic. Thanks for being with us today and enjoy the service.
Good morning and welcome to this Labor Day service. It is good to be with you, and I'm so glad to welcome UUCB friend Cynthia Phinney, who is the president of the Maine AFL-CIO chapter, and she has some great words to share with us this morning, and it was delightful for me to have a chance to meet her as we planned this service together. As you might be able to see, I'm in my office here at the church, and it is full of boxes. That is because I'm in the process of moving, and I could have aimed the camera so you wouldn't see them, but I thought actually, it's a good kind of metaphor for where we find ourselves. In this church community, we are at a time of transition. I personally am in a time of transition, and as a larger community, we're in this time of not knowing, time of not knowing what this virus will do next and what it will mean for our safety. As of this moment, as I record these opening words, we are planning to have worship in person next Sunday, September 12th, and we will also be broadcasting that service live. So if you're not able to attend or you don't feel comfortable attending an in-person service, you will be able to watch live, and it will feel a little bit different. The music will be pre-recorded, but the sermon and the prayer will be happening live, and there will be a few people at least there to help me record the service. So I think that will feel a little bit different. You'll feel like you're watching a live production. I know it will feel different to me to be able to speak with you in real time and take notice of what's happening in the world around us. So whether we are able to gather every week in person or not, there will be a live component to the service every week. And that is something that I am really looking forward to. And I'm grateful to your board and to our technical wizard, Judd Caswell, for making that happen. So let us be together in worship this morning, honoring the labor movement, which has brought us, well, we're going to learn more about that, but it has brought us the 5-day work week, the weekend. It has brought us child labor laws. Before we had a labor movement, children worked long hours, often in dangerous spaces. And I know that labor has gotten some dings against its reputation in some corners. But I am grateful for the labor movement. And certainly in this time of the pandemic, we've all been thinking about essential workers. So on this Labor Day, as we round the bend on yet another year of living with this coronavirus, it seems especially important to honor the workers and those who fight for their rights on this Labor Day. So let us be together in worship. It is good to be with you.
Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, singly none. Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, singly none.
Harvesting Hope, the story of Cesar Chavez, written by Kathleen Kroll and illustrated by Yuyi Muratas. Until Cesar Chavez was 10, every summer night was like a fiesta. Relatives swarmed onto the ranch for barbecues with watermelon, lemonade, and fresh corn. Cesar and his brothers, sisters, and cousins settled down to sleep outside under the netting to keep the mosquitoes out. But who could sleep, with uncles and aunts singing, spinning ghost stories, and telling magical tales of life back in Mexico? Cesar thought the whole world belonged to his family. The 80 acres of their ranch were an island in the shimmering Arizona desert, and the starry skies were their own. Many years earlier, Cesar's grandfather had built their spacious adobe house to last forever, with walls 18 inches thick. A vegetable garden, cows, and chickens supplied all the food they could want. With hundreds of cousins on farms nearby, there was always someone to play with. Cesar's best friend was his brother Richard. They never spent a day apart. Cesar was so happy at home that he was a little afraid when school started. On his first day, he grabbed the seat next to his older sister Rita. The teacher moved him to another seat, and Cesar flew out the door and ran home. It took 3 days of coaxing for him to return to school and take his place with the other first graders. Cesar was stubborn, but he was not a fighter. His mother cautioned her children against fighting, urging them to use their minds and mouths to work out conflicts. Then, in 1937, the summer Cesar was 10, the trees around the ranch began to wilt. The sun baked the farm soil rock hard. A drought was choking the life out of Arizona. Without water for the crops, the Chavez family couldn't make money to pay its bills. There came a day when Cesar's mother couldn't stop crying. In a daze, Cesar watched his father strap their possessions onto the roof of their old car. After a long struggle, the family no longer owned the ranch. They had no choice but to join the hundreds of thousands of people fleeing to the green valleys of California to look for work. Cesar's old life had vanished. Now he and his family were migrants, working on other people's farms, crisscrossing California, picking whatever fruits and vegetables were in season. When the Chavez family arrived at the first of their new homes in California, they found a battered old shed. Its doors were missing and garbage covered the dirt floor. Cold, damp air seeped into their bedding and clothes. They shared water and outdoor toilets with a dozen other families, and overcrowding made everything filthy. The neighbors were constantly fighting, and the noise upset Cesar. He had no place to play games with Richard. Meals were sometimes made of dandelion greens gathered along the road. Cesar swallowed his bitter homesickness and worked alongside his family. He was small and not very strong, but still a fierce worker. Nearly every crop caused torment. Yanking out beets broke the skin between his thumb and index finger. Grapevines sprayed with bug-killing chemicals made his eyes sting and his lungs wheeze. Lettuce had to be the worst. Thinning lettuce all day with a short-handled hoe would make hot spasms shoot through his back. Farm chores on someone else's farm instead of on his own felt like a form of slavery. The Chavez family talked constantly of saving enough money to buy back their ranch. But by each sundown, the family had only earned as little as 30 cents for each day's work. As the years blurred together, they spoke of the ranch less and less. The towns weren't much better than the fields. White trade only signs were displayed in many stores and restaurants. None of the 35 schools Cesar attended over the years seemed like a safe place either. Once, after Cesar broke the rule about speaking English at all times, a teacher hung a sign on him that read, "I am a clown. I speak Spanish." He came to hate school because of the conflicts, though he liked to learn. Even he considered the 8th grade graduation a miracle. After 8th grade, he dropped out to work in the fields full-time. His lack of school embarrassed Cesar for the rest of his life, but as a teenager, he just wanted to put food on his family's table. As he worked, it disturbed him that the landowners treated their workers more like farm tools than human beings. They provided no clean drinking water, rest periods, or access to the bathroom. Anyone who complained was fired, beaten up, or sometimes even murdered. So, like other migrant workers, Caesar was afraid and suspicious whenever outsiders showed up to try and help. How could they know about feeling so powerless? Who could battle such odds? Yet, Caesar never forgot his old life in Arizona and the jolt he'd felt when it was turned upside down. Farm work did not have to be this miserable. Reluctantly, he started paying attention to the outsiders. He began to think that maybe there was hope, and in his early 20s, he decided to dedicate the rest of his life to fighting for change. Again, he crisscrossed California, this time to talk people into joining his fight. At first, out of every 100 workers he talked to, perhaps one would agree with him. One by one, this was how he started. At the first meeting Caesar organized, a dozen women gathered. He sat quietly in a corner. After 20 minutes, everyone started to wonder when the organizer would show up. Caesar thought he might die of embarrassment. "Well, I'm the organizer," he said, and forced himself to keep talking, hoping to inspire respect with his new suit and mustache he was trying to grow. The women listened politely, and he was sure they did so out of pity. But despite his shyness, Caesar showed a knack for solving problems. People trusted him. With workers, he was endlessly patient and compassionate. With landowners, he was stubborn, demanding, and single-minded. He was learning to be a fighter. In a fight for justice, he told everyone, truth was a better weapon than violence. Nonviolence, he said, takes more guts. It meant using imagination to find ways to overcome powerlessness. More and more people listened. One night, 150 people poured into an old, abandoned theater in Fresno. At this first meeting of the National Farm Workers Association, Caesar unveiled its flag, a bold black eagle, the sacred bird of the Aztec Indians. La causa, the cause, was born. It was time to rebel, and the place was Delano. Here, in the heart of the lush San Joaquin Valley, brilliant green vineyards reached towards every horizon. Poorly paid workers hunched over grapevines for most of each year. Then, in 1965, the vineyard owners cut their pay even further. Caesar chose to fight just one of the 40 landowners, hopeful that others would get the message. As plump grapes drooped, thousands of workers walked off that company's fields in a strike, or a huelga. Grapes, when ripe, do not last long. The company fought back with everything from punches to bullets. Caesar refused to respond with violence. Violence would only hurt La Causa. Instead, he organized a march of more than 300 miles. He and his supporters would walk from Delano to the state capitol in Sacramento to ask for the government's help. Caesar and 67 others started out one morning. Their first obstacle was the Delano police force, 30 of whose members locked arms to prevent the group from crossing the street. After 3 hours of arguing in public, the chief of police backed down. Joyous marchers headed to the north under sizzling sun. Their rallying cry was "Sí se puede," or "Yes, it can be done." The first night they reached Decorah, the marchers slept outside in a tiny cabin of the only person who would welcome them. Single file, they continued, covering an average of 15 miles a day. They inched their way along the San Joaquin Valley, while the unharvested grapes in Delano turned white with mold. Caesar developed painful blisters right away. He and many others had blood seeping out of their shoes. The word spread. Along the way, farm workers offered food and drink as the marchers passed by. When the sun set, marchers lit candles and kept going. Shelter was no longer a problem. Supporters began welcoming them each night with feasts. Every night was a rally. "Our pilgrimage is the match," one speaker shouted, "that will light our cause for all farm workers to see what is happening here." Another cried, "We seek our basic God-given rights as human beings. Viva la causa!" Eager supporters would keep the marchers up half the night talking about change. Every morning, the line of marchers swelled, Caesar always in the lead. On the 9th day, hundreds marched through Fresno. The long, peaceful march was a shock to people unaware of how California farm workers had to live. Now students, public officials, religious leaders, and citizens from everywhere offered help. For the grape company, the publicity was becoming unbearable, and on the vines, the grapes continued to rot. In Modesto, on the 15th day, an exhilarated crowd celebrated Caesar's 38th birthday. 2 days later, 5,000 people met the marchers in Stockton with flowers, guitars, and accordions. That evening, Caesar received a message that he was sure was a prank, but in case it was true, he left the march and had someone drive him all through the night to a mansion in wealthy Beverly Hills. Officials from the grape company were waiting for him. They were ready to recognize the authority of the National Farm Workers Association, promising a contract with a pay raise and better conditions. Caesar rushed back to join the march. On Easter Sunday, when the marchers arrived in Sacramento, the parade was 10,000 people strong. From the steps of the state capitol building, the joyous announcement was made to the public. Cesar Chavez had just signed the first contract for farm workers in American history. The parade erupted into a giant fiesta. Crowds swarmed the steps, some people cheering, many weeping. Prancing horses carried men in mariachi outfits. Everyone sang and waved flowers or flags. They made a place of honor for the 57 marchers who had walked the entire journey. Speaker after speaker, addressing the audience in Spanish and in English, took the microphone. "You cannot close your eyes and your ears to us any longer," cried one. "You cannot pretend that we do not exist." The crowd celebrated until the sky was full of stars. The march had taken its toll. Caesar's leg was swollen and he was running a high fever. Gently, he reminded everyone that the battle was not over. It is well to remember there must be courage, but also that in victory there must be humility. Much more work lay ahead, but the victory was stunning. Some of the wealthiest people in the country had been forced to recognize some of the poorest as human beings. Cesar Chavez had won the fight without violence, and he would never be powerless again.
Let us be together for a moment of meditation and prayer. Spirit of life and love, we are living through continued, seemingly endless uncertainty. We worry about the people of Haiti who have endured political violence and an earthquake. We worry about the people of Afghanistan. We pray for their safety. And today we also pray for the safety of our beloveds in the south coast of the United States, in Louisiana and Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, where a recent hurricane and tropical storm have inundated many communities with water. And those of us who live in the north, we certainly have our share of weather. But one of the things that happens in the hurricane season in the south is that the hurricane comes and does its damage, and then the power goes out, and people have to endure this time of sweltering heat. And so we pray for their safety and their comfort. We pray that help will arrive, and that we will offer the help that we are asked to offer, that we can offer. May those who are in harm's way know that they are held in love. May they soon find help. May they soon find safety. And may this aching world somehow recover. May we do our part to help her. And may we hold one another in this time of uncertainty. with love, with patience, with compassion. And may all those essential workers, those who have continued laboring during this pandemic, unable to work from home, may they feel our gratitude, and may they be safe from harm. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen. Ashe.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our days shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient song of bread. Small art and love and beauty, their trudging spirits knew. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we bring the greater days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Questions from a Worker Who Reads by Bertolt Brecht. Who built Thebes of the 7 gates? In the books we will read the names of the kings. Did the kings haul up the lumps of rock? And Babylon so many times demolished, who raised it up so many times? In what houses of gold glittering Lima did its builders live? Where, the evening that the great wall of China was finished, did the masons go? Great Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who erected them? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Had Byzantium, much praised in song, only palaces for its inhabitants? Even in fabled Atlantis, the night that the ocean engulfed it, the drowning still cried out for their slaves. The young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar defeated the Gauls. Did he not even have a cook with him? Philip of Spain wept when his armada went down. Was he the only one to weep? Frederick II won the 7 Years' War. Who else won it? Every page a victory. Who cooked the feast for the victors? Every 10 years a great man. Who paid the bill? So many reports, so many questions.
I'm pleased to be with you today. I grew up in the Unitarian Universalist Church West in Brookfield, Wisconsin, and the UU faith is part of what shaped me and my worldview, part of what made me who I am. My life in my family and being deeply connected to the UUCW community led me on a path to seek to make better this amazing world that we live in, to move toward justice, to move toward unity of hearts and minds. And that path, though winding, led me to where I am now, the elected leader of the Maine AFL-CIO, a federation of labor unions. We are approximately 160 organizations comprised of or representing about 40,000 workers across our state. These include nurses, teachers, firefighters, mill workers, shipbuilders, grocery workers, government employees, construction workers, and more, working together to support and advance their interests and the interests of Maine's entire working class. I was surprised and pleased by the invitation to speak at your service when it arrived via email from my friend Jim Spicer. It provided for me an opportunity as this Labor Day approached to step back from the day-to-day work and reflect on what is happening more broadly for workers in our economy and how engagement with that might be shaped by UU values and perspectives, and an opportunity to share that reflection with you. The past 18 months has shed glaring light on work and workers and made more widely and starkly visible gross inequities, as well as many of the more hidden costs and risks of work as we've organized it in our society. It has revealed truths and raised questions. A cornerstone of the UU faith, as I learned it, is to question, to seek to learn. What questions that were simmering have come to a boil? What questions not yet simmering might we stir up if we work at it? I am lucky and privileged. I was able to immediately transition nearly all my work to home, as was most of our small staff. I did go out, masked, to join a rally in Bangor supporting the nurses in their fight for better conditions as they fight COVID on their job. To walk the picket line with the striking workers at the Bath Iron Works. To speak at a worker and community COVID safety rally in Portland. But mostly I worked, and still work, at home. This is in stark contrast to so many others. Grocery workers found themselves declared essential and expected to show up and continue to work even as shoppers across the country were wiping down their purchases before bringing them into the house, lest coronavirus come in with the food. Food. We need food. So not only grocery workers, but food packers, working closely under conditions that facilitated the spread of COVID-19, fell sick in plants across the country, including here in Maine. And workers exposed to the virus at work brought it home to their families. The first verse of a poem by an unknown proletarian. We have fed you all for 1,000 years, and you hail us still unfed, though there's never $1 of all your wealth, but marks the workers dead. We have yielded our best to give you rest, and you lie on crimson wool. Then if blood be the price of all your wealth, good God, we have paid it in full. We have fed you all for 1,000 years. These words remind me once again that the pandemic, of course, was not the beginning of injustice or inequity for the workers who perform the essential functions of keeping us fed, housed, and safe, as well as our desires met and our systems functioning. The pandemic gave many pause to ask questions that they may not have asked before, or that needed to be asked again, perhaps more loudly. There are so many questions to ask about all of this. What choice or voice do these workers have in what happens in their workplaces? In whose real interest are the decisions made? Does the pay of the workers reflect the risk they take to provide essential services? If not, why not? Are there better ways to keep workers safe and still provide what everyone actually needs, including workers? In March of 2020, as the coronavirus came to Maine and real hard decisions had to be made to try to minimize the spread, we convened a COVID response committee so union leaders could share what was happening in their workplaces and how they were responding. We heard stories of healthcare workers who had to reuse personal protective equipment, such as N95 masks, that they had previously been told should always be disposed of after use. Coincidentally, I heard just this week that they are needing to do that again. We heard about first responders needing to take more precautions than they ever had with every ambulance call because there was no way to know whether someone was carrying the virus and they were in close quarters. We heard about teachers agonizing about how to keep themselves, their students, and their students' families safe as we raced to learn more about how the virus actually spreads and what could be done to slow or stop it. We heard about mill workers deemed essential and continuing to report to work and do jobs that required close contact with coworkers in tight quarters. Union leaders shared tactics and strategies of workers using their collective voice and power to encourage or, when necessary, force management to do more to keep people safe in their workplaces. This included not only workers, but also patients, students, customers. And we heard more stories of solidarity. A factory in Portland employing a staff who are mostly new Americans who are also members of the United Steelworkers Union, and where the business was almost totally dependent on conferences and conventions to sell their merchandise. They had almost all their orders canceled when the pandemic hit. With no work to do, on top of the dangers to workers in close quarters on the factory floor, they sent the workers home. And then immediately began to pivot to be able to manufacture masks and other personal protective equipment. But before they could call the workers back, they needed to also rearrange the factory to allow the workers to safely social distance at work. A chance conversation with a member of the Stagehands Union, who along with all his co-workers were not deemed essential and were therefore totally out of work from the moment things began to shut down, led to a weekend of volunteer labor, moving equipment and erecting airflow barriers between workstations so that the factory workers, their union brothers and sisters, could safely return to work on Monday. Activists at Food and Medicine, a worker center in Brewer with a long history of bringing together unions, farmers, small businesses, and community organizations to, among other things, provide Thanksgiving meals for families in hard times, asked themselves how they could use their relationships and what they knew to respond to this moment. They began raising more money, which they spent purchasing takeout meals from local restaurants that purchased food grown by local farmers. They distributed the meals to laid-off workers and others whom the pandemic had suddenly left food insecure. Their efforts kept some restaurant workers on the job, while feeding workers who were suddenly unable to go to work and thus not receiving a paycheck. Their motto has long been solidarity, not charity, and their mission is not only to provide for those in need, but to be part of building an economy that works for everyone. Solidarity. These stories and strategies shared round the table, or Zoom window as it actually happened, strengthened the ability to respond to the myriad situation these leaders and union members were facing in workplaces around our state. And in the moments between responding to the crises, the questions kept bubbling up. How can we organize the economy to be more resilient, more responsive? What if we organized our economy with the goal of meeting everyone's essential needs? What power dynamic would need to change for that to happen? And workers were asking other questions as well. Questions like, does it have to be this way? Is this right? Could there be a more fair system? Can I change what's happening here? Am I the only one who thinks this should change? As a visible face of unions, the AFL-CIO is one of the places workers reach out to when they start to think they would like to change the conditions where they are employed. The months of the pandemic have seen a sharp uptick in calls, Facebook messages, emails, and online inquiries from workers wanting to know what their rights are, asking how to form a union where they work, wanting to know what it might take to make change on their jobs. We're happy to talk with these workers when they reach out, and if their interest is strong, connect them with appropriate unions and support them in their efforts. But joining a union isn't as easy as joining a church or social justice organization. I heard from Reverend Justine that many of you, like me, were following the effort of Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama, to form a union. Perhaps you also followed the efforts of nurses at Maine Medical Center or the Portland Museum of Art as they worked to organize their workplaces. The most common way to form a union in the current era and under our current labor laws is by an election. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? But imagine, if you will, an election different from the ones we participate in for city, state, or national offices. It's an election where one candidate or party can require you to attend all their speeches and rallies every day if they want to. They can pull you into their offices and talk to you one-on-one about why you should vote for them, about why the other candidate will ruin your life and your relationship with them. The other candidate or party can only talk with you if you choose on your own time to meet with them. Although current polling shows that slightly more than 60%, actually this week I saw something that said 68% of workers would like to have a union, if they choose to try to form one at their workplace, our current labor laws allow an election to be run this way, and most employers take full advantage of that ability. This is the state of our current labor law. Again, the questions: how did this happen? The National Labor Relations Act was passed in 1935. This is the law that sets the terms for many workers who want to form a union where they work. It doesn't cover all kinds of workers. The original sausage-making process that gave birth to it carved out certain occupations like railroad workers and farm workers, occupations held by large numbers of Black and brown people, perhaps not coincidentally. And it covers only the private sector, not federal, state, or municipal employees. Since its enactment, related legislation has only been to give employers more leeway and weaken the opportunities and protections it provides for workers. Even the protections that remain for workers wanting to organize unions are weak. When employers violate the law, for example, by firing people for trying to organize a union, the process for the National Labor Relations Board to decide the merits of an unfair labor practice charge can take months or even years. Meanwhile, fired workers need to get on with their lives and find new income, and the firing has most likely struck fear into the hearts of workers who remain, fear that will deter many from working to organize the union they were hoping for. Penalties are rarely more than posting a notice and reimbursing lost pay, minus any amount the workers themselves earned elsewhere after the termination, and are often apparently simply calculated as a cost of doing business. The exercising of these employer rights was seen in Bessemer, Alabama. Amazon workers were defeated in a campaign that included audacious anti-union moves by the employer, including petitioning the National Labor Relations Board to add thousands of workers to the group that had originally petitioned to form one. How easy would it be to organize 3,000 people you hadn't counted on in a matter of weeks? And successfully pressuring the post office about placement of a mailbox for voting. This move's currently being challenged in an unfair labor practice charge that could lead to a new vote, but organizers will have an uphill battle against fear and discouragement, and the mailbox was only one tactic. And this was seen closer to home at the Portland Museum of Art, an effort in which the workers narrowly prevailed despite the obstacles, including the laying off of an entire classification of workers, most of whom supported the union. But the cumbersome process meant that despite those layoffs standing, it took months to even get the votes counted. Also, in Maine, nurses at our largest hospital were working to organize, and at a time when COVID vaccines were available to only a very small slice of the population, hospital management allotted some of the precious serum to vaccinate hired union busters from out of state so that the busters could have unfettered access to the hospital workers throughout the facility. This is a tiny sample of what workers face when they try to band together to use their collective voice to change conditions where they work. There is an act in Congress to reverse this trend. It's called the PRO Act, which stands for Protecting the Right to Organize. The PRO Act would restore many of the rights that have been gutted from the National Labor Relations Act and set meaningful penalties for employers who break the law. It would close loopholes and establish practices to more closely level the field between workers who want to join together and employers who control their livelihoods and the conditions of their work. It will be sweeping and important labor reform, but you can imagine that the road to achieve it will not be easy. Do we believe in democracy? Should workers be able to have a collective voice in the conditions of their labor? Should they be able to make that choice free from coercion and fear instilled by the entity that controls their income? As a labor movement, we have answered yes to these questions, and the PRO Act is part of what we are doing to make that yes a reality. What can you do? Senator King needs to hear that his support is appreciated, and Senator Collins needs to hear that Maine people want her to join him in supporting the PRO Act, in supporting Maine's workers. You can learn more about what labor and our allies are doing to pass this legislation by Googling AFL-CIO PRO Act. And what else? You can think about the conditions for workers in all the places you do business, the workplaces where you, your friends, or your loved ones work. You can ask questions about the work we value, how we value it, and whether our system allows the value of that work to create appropriate value for the people who perform it. As we have talked this morning, who has been on your mind? Are you in a situation like any I have spoken of, a worker facing pandemic threats or fighting to have a voice on the job? Perhaps you have a voice on your job. Do you have friends, family, neighbors who face these situations? Have you been thinking of people you don't know but perhaps can imagine? If people who do the essential things to run our world are not in our close, trusted, loved circle, what questions must we ask to find out why and how to change that? There are questions to ask, and then we must act. The voices of people of faith, as they always have been, are critical in the fight for social and economic justice, to address income inequality and improve the lives of tens of millions of workers for generations to come. Labor Day calls us to recommit ourselves to working together in partnership, in solidarity, to build with our common values and address our shared concerns, to ask the questions, why is this so? And what can I do to make change? And finally, how can I stand in solidarity with you?
Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out divisions, with all of our voices and reach out to me, with all of our voices and reach out visions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to visions, I reach
could make such sweet harmony.
O Spirit among us, our lives are so linked with one another that all we do affects, for good or ill, all other lives. So guide us in the work we do, that we may do it not for self alone, but for the common good. And as we seek a proper return for our own labor, make us mindful of the rightful aspirations of other workers, and arouse our concern for those who are out of work. Together in spirit, together in action, forever and ever. Amen.